So hello AYVIANNA, welcome to Touch of Blues.
Hello.
And I'll kick off with
how do you feel about arts funding and theatre closures in the UK over the past few years?
So I am genuinely very concerned about the number of theatre closures that we've witnessed over the past 2 or 3 years, and the pace of these closures. I find it quite frightening. So to give a few examples, in 2023 Oldham Coliseum closed permanently, and that theatre has been open since the year 1885. And I went to drama school myself in Manchester, so Oldham Coliseum was one of those theatres that I used to visit when I was training in order to watch and learn. And I worry, where is today's student in the north of England meant to go to witness professional theatre? We've, in 2022, Hampstead Theatre lost 100% of its funding. That was a new writing hub. Where is the new writing meant to go? We've just heard the devastating news that Birmingham Council is cutting 100% of its arts funding, and that will affect not only Birmingham Rep, but also Birmingham Ballet, the opera, the dance festival. All of that will be lost. We've heard just in the last couple of weeks the Hope Theatre in Islington is going to shut after 11 years. The ENO, we had that huge debacle there. The Donmar Warehouse lost its funding. Bristol Old Vic is in line to lose its funding in April of this year. So I think, I find it terrifying as an actor, because these theatres like the Donmar and Bristol, these are world-renowned theatres. So if they can't keep their doors open and they can't justify their funding, what hope is there for an ordinary small fringe venue? If you're trying to run a fringe venue in a room above a pub with 30 seats, what hope is there for you? So I find it a terrifying state that we're in currently.
The present UK economy is performing rather poorly. There's been several years of austerity. People are on food banks. There's an increase in homelessness. So where do you see this funding for the arts coming from?
So the first point that I would make is that the money is there. That's the most important, significant point. So in 2023, a lot of the biggest banks actually reported record profits. And NatWest in 2023 had their biggest annual profit since the year 2007. And British Gas in 2023 also reported a tenfold increase in their profits. So this argument that the money isn't there simply doesn't hold water. That is false. I don't accept it. And what we would argue at Equity is we're not suggesting that you take the money from other struggling workers. We're suggesting you take the money from these record profits. So the same outlets that are reporting these record profits are also reporting that there's no money for the arts. So that is a real contradiction in terms. And I'll give you a very good example. So at the beginning of this year in January, the London Underground workers were due to go on strike, and Sadiq Khan magically suddenly found an extra £30 million to give those workers to stop the strike from happening. And they didn't even have to go on strike, they just threatened to strike. Now Sadiq Khan is in an election year, so obviously he wants to be popular when he's seeking re-election, and he didn't want to see a tube strike happening. But what that proves to me is that the money is there and can be found when they need to find it. So, where did he find £30 million? Was it down the back of the sofa or what? And we've seen collective action has been very, very effective. We've just had 18 months of strikes. And in almost all cases, I think Unite have won 80% of their strike actions they've taken in the last 2 years. And in the public sector, the average increase is between 4 to 6% in payments that they've won. And that's a huge increase when you think that at the beginning of this strike period, Rishi Sunak was insisting there was going to be a 0% increase, and he's now gone up to between 4 to 6%. So I don't accept that the money isn't there. The money is there. It is a political choice as to how the money is spent.
How does the UK government funding for the arts compare to that of other countries? After all, the UK does consider itself to be a world leader in arts.
So the European average government expenditure on the arts is 1%. So countries like France and Germany, they spend 1% of their government expenditure goes on the arts, whereas in the UK, we spend 0.4% on the arts. So we don't even spend half of what the average European spend is. And to give you a bit of context for that, the entire UK arts budget is less than the budget for Berlin. And Berlin is only one city in Germany. And when you look at local authorities and their funding for the arts, just to give an example, say that you live in Southwark and you look at Southwark Council and they have just literally, to give you an example, £100,000 to spend on the arts. You might look at that and think, oh, that sounds like quite a lot of money. But actually, within the local authority budget for arts and culture, that also covers spending on religion and sport and any kind of recreational activity. So out of that 100,000, your council is also spending, that money is also going to your local church, your local football ground if you have one, local swimming baths, maybe even the playground for kids. So it's a way, it can be quite a misleading figure because it can give you an inflated idea of how much is actually being spent on the arts in that area. And I'd like to also add that it's this idea that money spent on the arts is wasted money, is money just kind of thrown out the window. That's not actually true. Our research at Equity has found that for every £1 which you spend on the arts, it generates £4 for the local economy. When you think of people spending money on hotels or restaurants or having a drink after the show, it actually generates income. Cultural activities are the third biggest income generator for our economy in London after retail and banking. And you only have to look at shows like War Horse, for instance, which began at the National Theatre and has been sold to about 25 other countries all around the world, generating income everywhere it goes. So the idea that the arts don't pay for itself, even if you just want to look at a purely fiscal argument, that is not true.
Your American counterparts, SAG-AFTRA, have been on an extended strike, supported by a number of high-profile stars. How do you feel regarding the outcome of the strike and the final settlement?
So Equity's film and TV agreements are up for renegotiation this year, and whatever agreement SAG wins in the US, that tends to directly inform the sort of deal that we're likely to get. So I have been following the SAG strike with interest. I would say that there are some positive things that they've won. They've got better healthcare, for instance, which is very important, obviously, to Americans, but doesn't really apply to us in this country. I feel that I don't feel they've completely resolved the issue of residuals and royalties for digital streaming services, because there's still this issue of the lack of transparency. So say that you have starred in, for the sake of argument, an episode of Orange is the New Black. Netflix is not transparent with its data, so they still will not tell you how many people have watched that episode and in how many different territories or countries. And until you have that information, it's very difficult to tackle this issue of fair residuals. So that's one issue that I would point out. I would also say that I think there are loopholes with the AI agreement that was come to. So there is provision within the new settlement that you must be paid if your digital replica is working. So if your digital replica is being used, either doing background work on a film or whatever, you need to be paid for that. However, they have left it up to the producers to calculate how much that work is worth. And it's up to them to tell you how often they've used your replica, and it's up to them to kind of tell you how much they owe you, which I think is open to abuse, I would say, and potentially problematic. I would also say that there is provision within the terms of the agreement that you have to give consent if your digital replica is going to be used. However, I think that can be a bit misleading, because a lot of the time giving consent is a condition of work. So when you turn up to audition, you're given something to sign, and if you don't sign it, you don't work. So I question to what extent this consent is genuinely freely given. And the idea that you've given consent, it can be a bit of a red herring if you didn't truly have much choice in the matter. So those are some issues that I think are perhaps still to be resolved in the future.
You may be aware this podcast is aimed primarily at a Northern Irish audience. Given that you are Northern Irish, how do you feel regarding provision for arts training in Northern Ireland?
So I went to drama school in Manchester, and I was forced, I suppose, to go to drama school in England, because the sad situation is that even in the year 2024, there is still no accredited drama school training available in Northern Ireland. There are several accredited schools in Scotland, there's one in Wales, there's several across the north of England, and there is a proliferation of schools in London, as you can imagine. But there's nothing in Northern Ireland, which I think is terrible and creates a huge barrier for Northern Irish young people. You know, we have this amazing, rich history of Irish culture, brilliant writers, poets, actors, musicians, and yet if you want to train to become a professional actor yourself, you have no choice but to leave. And it creates a huge barrier also in terms of money, because if you think about the expense incurred, I mean, I remember other English students when I was auditioning at drama schools complaining about the cost of having to get the train to their audition. I used to have to find the money for a plane ticket, or if not a plane, then a boat. Sometimes I would get the overnight ferry, sometimes a hotel room, if the audition was ending later in the day. And a lot of drama schools actually, they will have the initial audition and then a recall audition a week later, which means you have to be able to pay for the whole trip twice. And I was quite young at the time, which meant that my poor sainted father used to have to take a day off his work in order to accompany me on this journey. And how many people are in a position to be able to do that? So it's a terrible situation that we've created for Northern Irish young people, and puts us at a huge disadvantage.